School principal humiliates poor girl for torn shoes, unaware her mom signs his paycheck. The sharp sound of leather hitting tile cut through the school courtyard like a warning shot. Principal Daniel Huxley held the small, worn sneaker between two fingers, lifting it high above the heads of hundreds of students gathered for morning assembly. Amina Carter stood barefoot on the cold concrete, her toes curled slightly against the shock of humiliation as whispers exploded around her. The principal's voice echoed through the loudspeakers, calm, deliberate, almost satisfied. "This is what happens when students refuse to respect standards," he said, shaking the torn shoe as if it were evidence in a criminal case. A few students laughed nervously. Teachers avoided eye contact. Amina did not move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the shoe, stitched twice at the side, the sole peeling like old paper. Then Daniel stepped closer and dropped it at her feet. Not gently, not accidentally, intentionally. "Pick it up," he said. The microphone caught every syllable. Amina bent down slowly, not because she was obedient, but because she refused to let her knees give out. Her fingers touched the cold rubber. That shoe had walked her through rain, through broken sidewalks, through nights when her mother came home too tired to speak. A boy near the front row muttered, "She shouldn't even be here." Another laughed. Daniel raised his hand. The courtyard quieted again. "Students like this damage the reputation of our institution," he continued, glancing at the administration balcony where wealthy parents stood watching. Amina finally spoke, her voice small but steady. "I have never been late. I have never failed a test." A pause. The principal tilted his head slightly. "And yet you look like you don't belong here." That sentence landed heavier than the shoe itself. 3 hours earlier, Amina had been walking through the same gates, carefully avoiding puddles so her shoes would not tear further. She had noticed the new security guard staring at her feet before she even reached the entrance. Inside her backpack, she carried a folded permission slip signed by her teacher and a sandwich wrapped in paper. Nothing else. No phone. No luxury. Only discipline and silence. She had not expected danger from a place built for learning. She had expected structure. Safety. But safety was not what she received. At exactly 7:42 a.m., she was pulled from class and escorted to the courtyard. No explanation. No warning. Only instructions. Stand there. And now, in front of everyone, Daniel Huxley turned the shoe again in his hand like it was a symbol of decay. "This school does not lower its standards for pity," he said. Amina's gaze shifted for the first time, not to him but to the administration balcony above. There, half hidden behind glass, stood a woman in a dark blazer, watching without moving. Her face was unreadable. In her hand, a simple silver ring caught the morning light. Amina did not know it yet, but that ring was the first crack in the system that had just decided to erase her. And as Daniel prepared to speak again, the intercom crackled softly, an unfamiliar voice from the principal's office saying, "Hold all disciplinary actions pending financial review." The courtyard froze. Even Daniel turned slightly toward the building. But Amina only tightened her grip on the broken shoe, because for the first time, the silence around her did not feel like the end of the story. It felt like the beginning of something no one in that courtyard was ready to understand. The courtyard had barely started to breathe again when the announcement echoed a second time through the loudspeakers. Softer now, but heavier in meaning. Disciplinary actions are on hold pending financial review. Students shifted uneasily, glancing at each other as if the air itself had changed temperature. Amina still stood where she had been placed, the torn shoe pressed against her thigh like something alive she could not drop. Then, without waiting for permission, she turned and walked, not away from the system, but straight into it. Each step across the concrete felt louder than the principal's voice had been. Inside the main building, the halls smelled of disinfectant and polished wood. Amina moved quickly, barefoot on one side, shoe in hand on the other, ignoring the stares that followed her like small cuts. She reached the administrative corridor where students were not usually allowed without escort. A security guard lifted a hand to stop her, but paused when he saw her face. Still calm, still refusing to break. "I need my records," she said quietly, holding out her permission slip from earlier. The guard hesitated, then pointed toward the office without speaking. Inside, the receptionist was arguing with a younger student in a wrinkled uniform. The boy's hands were shaking. "I didn't take it," he kept saying, voice cracking. "I didn't even touch it." A wallet lay open on the desk with a missing bill inside. The receptionist didn't look convinced. "We've heard that before," she said sharply, already reaching for a disciplinary form. Amina stopped. She wasn't supposed to stop. She had a reason to leave immediately. Her scholarship review, the humiliation still burning under her skin. But something about the boy's face pulled her in harder than fear. She stepped forward. "He didn't do it," Amina said. The receptionist looked up, irritated. "You don't know that." Amina glanced at the boy's hands. "His fingers are clean. No ink, no residue from the cash drawer. And his shoes are too small for the counter height. You can see he never reached it without being noticed." The room went quiet in a way that felt dangerous. The boy blinked at her like he had just been seen for the first time. The receptionist frowned. "Are you a detective now?" Amina didn't answer. She simply reached into her backpack and placed her untouched sandwich on the desk. "Check the camera above the register," she said. Then she turned to leave. She had taken 3 steps when the receptionist called after her. "You're not dismissed yet." Amina stopped but didn't turn around. "Principal Huxley requested your scholarship be placed under disciplinary suspension," the woman said, reading from a screen. "Effective immediately." The words didn't land like surprise. They landed like confirmation that kindness always had a price here. Amina exhaled slowly, gripping the torn shoe tighter. Behind her, the boy was now being questioned differently. Not as a thief, but as a possibility. As she reached the hallway, she saw her again. The woman in the dark blazer stood near the finance corridor, half hidden behind a glass panel. The same silver ring caught the fluorescent light, flashing briefly like a signal. This time, the woman was watching Amina directly. Not the shoes. Not the uniform. Her. Amina slowed without meaning to. The woman did not move. Just then, a staff member hurried past whispering. The financial audit was triggered externally. No one inside approved it. Amina felt the words settle somewhere deep, though she didn't yet understand why. The woman in the blazer finally turned away, disappearing into the corridor marked Executive Finance. And as Amina stood there holding one broken shoe and a suspended future, she realized something had just shifted inside the school. Not because of what the principal said, but because of what someone outside the system had just decided to look at. The finance corridor felt colder than the rest of the school, not because of temperature, but because of silence that had rules behind it. Amina lingered at the edge of it longer than she intended, watching staff move in and out of glass doors labeled Executive Finance. Every person who passed carried themselves differently here, less like teachers or administrators, more like people guarding something they were afraid to name. Inside, through the glass, she saw the woman again. The same blazer. The same silver ring catching light at precise moments, as if even reflection obeyed her. The woman stood at a long table covered in folders stamped with budget codes and audit labels. 2 men in suits spoke to her quietly, but when one of them tried to slide a document forward, she raised a hand and stopped him. Not aggressively, just decisively. The room obeyed. Amina pressed closer to the glass without realizing it. A staff badge lay on a nearby desk, and she caught a partial name on it, E. Carter. The letters didn't mean anything yet, but they stayed in her mind longer than they should have. A door opened behind her. A man in a gray security vest stepped out. "You're not authorized to be here," he said, but his voice lacked certainty, as if he had been told to enforce rules. He didn't fully understand. Amina turned slightly. "I'm not trying to enter," she said. "I'm trying to understand what's happening to my scholarship." The man hesitated, then lowered his voice. "You picked a bad day to stand near that office." "Why?" she asked. He glanced toward the glass corridor before answering. "Because external auditors don't walk in unless something is already broken." Before Amina could respond, the woman inside the finance room finally looked up. Her eyes met Amina's through the glass. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the woman said something to the men beside her and stepped toward the door. The security man shifted immediately, tense now. "You should go," he muttered. The door opened. The woman stepped out into the corridor without urgency, as if she had already accounted for Amina being there long before she arrived. Up close, Amina noticed details she hadn't seen before. Faint ink stains on the woman's fingers, like she spent more time signing documents than speaking, and a small crack in the silver ring, repaired but not hidden. "You shouldn't be in this hallway," the woman said calmly. Her voice wasn't harsh. It was measured, like someone used to controlling outcomes rather than conversations. Amina lifted her chin slightly. "My scholarship was suspended without explanation." The woman studied her for a long second, then glanced at the torn shoe still in Amina's hand. "That decision was not financial," she said. "It was procedural. I was humiliated in front of the entire school," Amina replied. "Procedures don't do that. People do." A flicker crossed the woman's face. Too quick to be emotion, too precise to be nothing. Before she could respond, a notification chimed from her phone. She didn't look at it immediately. Instead, she said quietly, "Some procedures exist to prevent attention, not to create it." That sentence should have been meaningless, but it wasn't. It sounded like something said by someone who had already seen what happens when attention lands in the wrong place. Amina noticed something else then. A folder on the edge of the woman's table inside the office, partially open. The top page showed a budget sheet with highlighted rows labeled "Scholarship Allocation Override." Her name was not on it, but the space beside it had been left blank, as if waiting. The woman followed Amina's gaze and closed the door behind her just slightly faster than necessary. "You should return to class," she said. Amina didn't move. "Am I still suspended?" she asked. A pause. The first real hesitation. Then the woman answered, "That depends on what the audit finds." And as she turned back toward the finance office, leaving Amina in the corridor filled with locked doors and partial answers, Amina realized something unsettling. The decision that had ruined her morning wasn't finished yet. It was still being written somewhere she was not allowed to see. The message arrived without warning on a plain institutional tablet, delivered by a silent assistant who didn't wait for acknowledgement. Amina read it twice before it fully registered. Temporary reassignment. Student Oversight Unit. Executive floor access granted. Below it was a code she had never seen before, and a line that made no explanation. Report directly to Finance Observation Room. She stood still in the corridor, the torn shoe still in her hand, feeling as if the school had just shifted its shape around her. When she stepped into the elevator marked staff only, the air changed again. Colder, filtered, expensive in a way she could not define but immediately recognized. The walls were polished steel instead of paint, the silence inside too controlled, like even sound required permission here. A camera blinked softly in the corner as the doors closed. The elevator did not display floors, simply moved. When it opened, Amina was no longer in the school she knew. The executive floor smelled faintly of cedar wood and printer ink, and every step she took sank into carpet so thick it muted her presence. A woman stood at the end of the hallway waiting for her. Tall, sharply dressed, holding a clipboard that looked heavier than paper should. Her badge read, "Marissa Vale, Compliance Director." "You're early," the woman said without greeting. "Or late. Depends on whether you understand what this floor is." Amina tightened her grip on her backpack. "I was told to report here." Marissa's eyes moved briefly to the torn shoe still in Amina's hand. "Interesting choice of item to carry into executive space." A pause. "You understand this is not a classroom. Nothing here is corrected with sympathy." She turned and walked, expecting Amina to follow without instruction. The hallway opened into a glass-walled room overlooking the entire school courtyard. From here, students looked like organized patterns rather than individuals. "This is the observation zone," Marissa said. "Every disciplinary decision is reviewed here before it becomes final." Amina stepped closer to the glass. Down below, She could see the courtyard where everything had started, now reduced to a controlled geometry of movement and supervision. "Why am I here?" she asked. Marissa placed the clipboard on a metal table. "Because someone requested you not be removed from the system yet." That sentence landed heavier than any punishment Amina had received so far. Before she could respond, the door behind them opened again. A man entered without introducing himself. He wore no badge, only a dark suit and a voice that carried authority without raising volume. "We'll begin the evaluation," he said. Marissa stepped aside immediately. "Evaluation," Amina repeated. The man finally looked at her directly. "You intervened in a disciplinary event and demonstrated corrective reasoning under pressure." He placed a tablet on the table and slid it toward her. "This is a simulated case file. You have 10 minutes. Tell us where the system failed." Amina stared at the screen. It was a fabricated student record, wrong names, altered incidents, rewritten punishments. But the structure was familiar. Too familiar. Marissa watched her closely, arms crossed. The man did not blink. Outside the glass wall, Amina saw movement in the corridor opposite, brief, deliberate. The woman with the silver ring was there again, half hidden, observing without entering. Amina looked back at the tablet. 10 minutes. No instructions beyond that. No help. Only judgment disguised as opportunity. As she began to read, she realized something quietly unsettling. This was not a reward for what she had done earlier. It was a test designed by someone who already knew she would be brought here. And somewhere beyond the glass, someone was watching to see not whether she would pass, but what she would notice first. The 10-minute countdown on the tablet began without sound, only a faint pulsing line in the corner of the screen that felt more like a heartbeat than a timer. Amina stood in the glass observation room with Marissa Vale watching her from the side, arms still crossed, expression unreadable. The anonymous man in the dark suit remained at the far end of the table, not speaking, as if silence itself was part of the evaluation. Amina lowered her eyes to the simulated case file. At first glance, it looked like a standard disciplinary scenario: student misconduct, missing funds, conflicting witness reports. But as she scrolled, something felt off. The numbers didn't follow school logic. They followed accounting logic, intentional manipulation logic. Her fingers tightened slightly around the torn shoe she had carried into the room without realizing she still held it. Then she placed it gently on the edge of the table, as if anchoring herself. "You're allowed to think out loud," Marissa said flatly. Amina didn't respond. Instead, she leaned closer to the screen. A discrepancy in the disciplinary fine structure caught her attention. Penalties that should have gone to student activity funds were being rerouted through administrative adjustment codes. She traced one entry backward, then another, her eyes moving faster now. Not guessing, recognizing patterns. "This isn't a student issue," she said quietly. The man in the suit finally shifted his gaze. "Explain." Amina tapped the screen once. "These adjustments don't correct behavior. They correct visibility. Someone is hiding financial movement inside disciplinary records, so it doesn't trigger audit flags." Marissa's expression changed slightly, just enough to register interest, not approval. "That's an assumption," she said. Amina shook her head. "It's consistent. Every penalty marked behavioral correction aligns with a missing allocation elsewhere. It's not punishment. It's redistribution." She zoomed in. Further, linking 3 separate entries. A pattern formed that even the simulation didn't try to hide anymore. The room grew quieter. The man in the suit stepped closer for the first time. "Show me the origin point." Amina followed the chain backward until one line repeated across multiple files. Executive Oversight Clearance, initialized. And beneath it, a signature field partially masked but not fully erased. "E. Carter," the silver-ringed woman. Amina didn't say the name. She only looked at it longer than necessary. Marissa noticed. "You recognize that signature?" she asked. Amina hesitated, then answered carefully. "I recognize the structure behind it." She stood straighter now, voice steadier. Whoever designed this system doesn't want punishment. They want control without exposure. A long pause followed. Then the timer stopped. The man in the suit closed the tablet. "Evaluation complete," he said. Marissa walked to the glass wall and pressed a small button. Somewhere below, in the school's lower floors, a printer began to run. Fast, continuous, urgent. "You exceeded expected detection thresholds," Marissa said, now looking at Amina differently. Not kindly, not warmly, but carefully. That wasn't just pattern recognition. That was structural awareness. Amina picked up her torn shoe again without thinking, turning it slowly in her hand. The stitching felt looser now, like it had been worn down not by time, but by distance. "What happens now?" she asked. The man in the suit did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the hallway glass where Amina had seen the silver-ringed woman earlier. "Now," he said, "we see who reacts to your findings." Down in the school below, unnoticed alarms had already started shifting priorities in administrative systems. Locked files were being accessed. Emails were being rerouted. And in Principal Huxley's office, a notification appeared on his screen with no sender name attached. Audit vector confirmed. Subject A. Carter. He stared at it for only a second before reaching for the phone. Because somewhere in the structure he thought he controlled, something had just started moving toward him, and it was no longer quiet. The first sign was not a warning. It was a correction. Amina noticed it when she returned to the observation corridor. The glass walls no longer showed the same administrative flow. Staff who had previously avoided her gaze were now looking directly at her through reflections, as if her presence had become an object of analysis rather than curiosity. On the lower floors, printers were no longer printing reports, they were printing names. Her name, repeated, categorized, tagged under systemic breach risk. Marissa Vale stood beside her but did not speak at first. The silence felt intentional, like even explanation required authorization now. Then Amina saw it on the wall-mounted display. School-wide notice. Temporary suspension of student A. Carter. Under investigation for data interference and unauthorized access. A ripple moved through the executive floor. Not chaos coordination. Someone had already prepared the narrative. Marissa finally spoke, her tone lower now. "This didn't originate from here." Amina's eyes stayed on the screen. "No," she said quietly. "It originated from someone who understood exactly what I touched." Downstairs, the school had changed tone. The courtyard intercom replayed fragments of a statement, selectively edited footage of Amina near restricted files, her image framed beside warnings about external manipulation. It wasn't a full lie. It was something more dangerous. A curated truth. Principal Huxley appeared on camera moments later, standing in front of the faculty board, hands folded, expression controlled. "We are dealing with a breach of institutional integrity," he said. His voice carried calm authority, the kind that makes accusation sound like procedure. A student exploited privileged access and compromised confidential financial records. The phrasing was precise, surgical, not emotional, believable. That was what made it effective. Amina watched from above, her fingers slowly tightening around the torn shoe again without realizing it. "He's reframing me," she said. Marissa did not deny it. Instead, she said, "He's protecting his version of the system." Amina turned sharply. "And the truth?" Marissa hesitated for the first time. "The truth is not what gets defended first. It's what survives scrutiny." That was when Amina understood she was no longer inside an evaluation. She was inside a counterattack. The accusation expanded quickly. Emails were sent to parents. Screens across hallways flashed warnings about unauthorized student conduct. A fabricated log file appeared in the system showing Amina accessing restricted financial directories at impossible hours. But there was one detail she noticed immediately. The timestamp pattern was wrong. Not accidentally wrong, conveniently wrong. Someone had rushed the forgery. She stepped back toward the terminal she had used earlier, ignoring Marissa's warning glance. "Don't touch that," Marissa said. Amina didn't stop. Her eyes scanned system metadata she had memorized during the evaluation. They didn't just fake access logs, she said. They copied an old system signature. She tapped once, isolating the digital footprint. This wasn't created by the school's IT team. Pause. It was copied from executive-level override history. That was the first crack. Somewhere below, a notification sounded again. This time urgent, repeated, escalating. A financial lock had been triggered across multiple departments. Not by Amina, by containment protocol. Principal Huxley appeared again in a live hallway feed, speaking to security officers now instead of faculty. Locate the student immediately, he said, voice tighter than before. She is attempting to destabilize institutional systems. Amina stepped away from the screen slowly. For the first time, she wasn't being ignored or tested. She was being contained. And worse, she realized they had already decided what she was guilty of before she ever defended herself. Marissa finally broke silence again, softer this time. Someone inside the system wants you removed before the audit completes. Amina looked down at the torn shoe in her hand. It no longer felt like an object of humiliation. It felt like evidence that had been underestimated. And as security doors began locking in sequence across the executive floor, sealing exits one by one, Amina understood the second phase had already begun. Not to evaluate her anymore, but to erase her before she could finish what she had started. The lockdown doors closed with a sound that didn't feel mechanical so much as intentional, like the building itself had decided to stop listening. Amina stood in the narrowing corridor outside the executive observation room as red indicators pulsed above each exit, sealing routes one by one. Staff moved past her without stopping, eyes lowered, voices controlled, as if even acknowledging her now carried administrative risk. On every screen mounted along the walls, her face appeared under the same label, Student A. Carter, under active security review. Not suspended anymore. Not evaluated. Contained. Marissa Vale stood a few steps behind her, but the distance between them felt larger than space. It felt like procedure. They escalated faster than expected, Marissa said quietly. Amina didn't turn. No, she replied. They responded exactly how someone responds when they're afraid the system will be exposed. Her voice was steady, but her hands had gone still, locked around the torn shoe she hadn't set down since the evaluation began. Somewhere deep in the building, alarms shifted tone. No longer warning, but confirmation. Down the corridor, 2 security officers approached, their pace controlled but firm. Not rushing, executing. Amina Carter, one of them said, you are required to come with us for verification protocol. Marissa stepped forward slightly. She is under observation authorization, she said, showing her clearance tablet. The officer didn't even look at it for long. That authorization has been overridden. A pause. Then softer, effective immediately. That was when Amina understood something simple and final. Authority here did not ask permission to change itself. It only needed consensus at the top. The officers moved closer. Marissa's tablet beeped once, then went dark. System access revoked. Amina exhaled slowly, not in fear, but in recognition. So this is the correction phase, she said under her breath. One officer reached for her arm. She stepped back just enough to avoid being grabbed, not resisting violently, but refusing surrender in motion. The torn shoe slipped slightly in her hand, and for the first time, she noticed something she hadn't before. A seam along the inner lining, uneven, reinforced twice, not like repair, but concealment. The memory snapped into place. Earlier, when she had picked it up after the courtyard humiliation, she had felt something harder beneath the fabric. At the time, she thought it was just worn stitching. Now she understood it differently. A hidden seam does not exist by accident in a school shoe that has survived years of poverty. It exists because someone wanted something to survive inside it. Amina tightened her grip and stepped just out of reach again. You're making a mistake, Marissa said, but this time her voice lacked structure. as if she was no longer sure which side of procedure she stood on. "No," Amina replied, eyes still on the shoe. "The mistake already happened when they decided I didn't matter enough to listen to." Another alarm chimed, lower floor access logs being wiped in real time. Evidence suppression, not containment. That was the difference. The realization changed something in her posture. Not fear. Direction. The officers moved again, faster now. Amina turned sharply and stepped into the adjacent maintenance corridor before they could close the distance. The door slid partially behind her, slow enough for one final exchange of eye contact with Marissa. "If you're right," Marissa called after her, voice tightening, "then you're already inside a system that won't let you leave with proof." Amina looked down at the shoe in her hand. "Then I don't leave," she said quietly. "I follow it." And for the first time since the courtyard, she pressed her fingers into the torn stitching and felt something rigid hidden beneath the fabric. Something that did not belong to the school, did not belong to accident, and had been waiting far too long to be found. As the maintenance door sealed behind her and the sound of pursuit shifted direction, Amina made a decision she could not undo. She would stop running from the accusation and start uncovering what they had buried inside the system that created it. The maintenance corridor behind the sealed door was narrower then. It looked from the outside, vibrating faintly with the hidden infrastructure of the school. Pipes, cables, locked access panels that no student was ever meant to see. Amina moved quickly now, not running blindly, but following patterns she had started noticing since the moment the system turned against her. Access points always clustered near financial nodes. Security logs always routed through secondary terminals before deletion. The torn shoe was still in her hand, but she held it differently now, not like an object of shame, but like a container. When she pressed her fingers into the loosened stitching, she felt it again, the rigid shape hidden inside the lining. She stopped at a utility junction, knelt, and carefully tore a small section of the inner seam. A thin, encrypted microdrive slipped into her palm. Not school-issued, not standard, executive grade. Her breathing changed, but she stayed quiet. Behind her, distant footsteps echoed search teams branching through corridors. She slid the drive into her pocket just as Marissa's voice crackled faintly through a nearby wall intercom, rerouted and unstable. "Amina, if you can hear this, do not let them isolate you. The audit isn't just financial anymore, it's structural." The line cut. That was enough. Amina stood and moved again, now toward the lower service lift she had memorized during her brief time on the executive floor. Meanwhile, in the main auditorium, Principal Daniel Huxley stood at a podium that had been set up within an hour, as if the school had been waiting for an excuse to turn punishment into performance. Rows of parents, faculty, and board members filled the seats. Screens above displayed official statements, security breach contained, student misconduct under review. Huxley's expression was controlled, but his fingers tapped the edge of the podium with increasing pressure. "We are dealing with a coordinated attempt to disrupt institutional integrity," he said. His voice carried authority, but underneath it was something sharper, urgency disguised as certainty. Unauthorized access, fabricated financial links, internal sabotage. A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd, carefully. Seated. Then the auditorium doors opened. Not dramatically, not violently, just open. Amina walked in alone. "No escort, no permission." Holding the torn shoe, the room shifted immediately. Whispering rose, then stalled. Huxley's eyes locked on her. "You are not authorized to be here," he said. Amina didn't respond to him. She looked instead toward the screen above the stage. "You said I fabricated financial links," she said calmly. "Then explain this." She raised the microdrive. A technician tried to cut the feed, but the system hesitated just long enough. The screen flickered. A file structure appeared. Executive Override Ledger. Unregistered transactions. The room shifted again, but this time it wasn't emotion. It was attention. Amina stepped closer to the stage, plugging the drive into the auxiliary port at the base of the podium, something she had noticed earlier during assembly inspections. The system resisted for half a second, then accepted it. Data exploded onto the screens. Not allegations. Not summaries. Raw routing logs. Signatures. Time-stamped approvals. And at the center of it all, the repeated identifier E. Carter, Financial Authority. A silence fell so complete it felt physical. Huxley froze. "That's manipulated," he said immediately, too quickly. "That's not valid system data." But even as he spoke, another layer unfolded. Audit verification hashes matching external oversight servers, confirming authenticity. Amina's voice stayed steady. "You didn't just discipline students," she said. "You moved money through them." A murmur rose, breaking formation. Huxley stepped forward now, abandoning calm. "She accessed restricted executive files. This is evidence of intrusion." Amina shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "This is evidence of what you tried to bury." The screens shifted again, this time showing authorization trails linking disciplinary actions directly to financial rerouting. Every punishment had a cost. Every accusation had a transaction. And every transaction led back to oversight signatures the system had tried to fragment. Huxley turned toward the board. "Terminate this display," he ordered. But no one moved, because the system had already been mirrored externally. The evidence was no longer contained within the school. It was live, public, uneditable. Amina stood at the edge of the stage, still holding the torn shoe, now the only object in the room that hadn't been part of the system's design. And as Principal Huxley finally realized that every denial he made only deepened the record being exposed in real time, the truth crossed the point of no return, not because it was loud, but because it could no longer be erased. The auditorium did not return to silence after the truth was exposed. It fractured into it. Not empty silence, but divided silence. Students whispering in disbelief, faculty frozen in recognition, board members staring at screens that could no longer be edited, only witnessed. Principal Daniel Huxley stood at the edge of the stage as if the floor beneath him had lost legal definition. The same man who had lifted a torn shoe to shame a child now looked at rows of financial trails that could not be argued with, only accounted for. His voice came again, but weaker now, stripped of performance. "This is an unauthorized external manipulation of internal systems." No one moved to support him, because the system itself was already answering. The screens above the stage continued to cycle through verified audit pathways, each disciplinary punishment, each suspended scholarship, each behavioral correction tied cleanly, unmistakably to financial rerouting. And at the center of every path, the same signature E. Carter. Amina stood at the edge of the stage holding the torn shoe, but now no one was looking at the shoe the same way. It was no longer an object of humiliation. It was evidence that had survived every attempt to erase it. Behind the glass wall of the upper balcony, Evelyn Carter finally stepped forward into full view. Not hidden, not observing, present. The room reacted instantly, but not with noise, with recalibration. Because presence changed hierarchy faster than speech ever could. She did not rush. She did not perform shock or anger. She simply looked at Huxley the way someone looks at a decision that has already expired. "You continued to operate after compliance flags were raised," she said calmly. Her voice carried without effort. "That is not a misunderstanding. That is intent." Huxley turned toward her, trying to reclaim structure. "You have no authority to override administrative discipline without board consensus." Evelyn nodded once. "Correct." A pause. "Which is why I didn't override it." She lifted a small tablet. "I documented it." The board members shifted for the first time, not as observers but as participants suddenly aware of their own exposure. Amina stepped forward slightly, not to intervene, but to ensure nothing was lost in translation. "He didn't just target me," she said quietly. "He used punishment records to move funds away from students who wouldn't be questioned." A murmur spread, not outrage yet, but recognition forming into something irreversible. Huxley's composure cracked. "She is a student," he said sharply, pointing at Amina now. "She is not qualified to interpret financial governance." Amina met his eyes directly. I didn't interpret it, she said. I followed it. That distinction landed harder than accusation. Evelyn turned slightly toward the board. You will vote, she said. No threat. No emotion. Just procedure now redirected. And your vote will be recorded in the same system you allowed to be corrupted. One board member tried to speak, then stopped, because the evidence was no longer abstract. It was layered. Timestamps, signatures, rerouted allocations, and confirmation logs from external audit servers that had already duplicated the entire record beyond school control. There was no deletion left, only consequence. Huxley stepped back from the podium, realizing too late that authority does not disappear when challenged. It simply changes location. He looked at Amina one last time, as if searching for the version of the story where she had remained small enough to ignore. But she wasn't small. She had never been. The final vote was not dramatic. It was procedural. But when the result was read, it carried weight that no speech could replicate. Termination of administrative authority, immediate suspension pending investigation, full external audit enforcement. Huxley did not respond. Not because he had nothing to say, but because nothing he could say would be recorded as relevant anymore. As security escorted him out, not forcefully but formally, Amina finally looked down at the torn shoe in her hand. For the first time since the courtyard, she did not see it as something that had been used against her. She saw it as something that had carried her through the system long enough for the system to reveal itself. Evelyn stepped down from the balcony and approached her, stopping at a respectful distance that felt newly earned, not assumed. You didn't need me to finish this, she said quietly. Amina shook her head once. No, she replied, but you made sure it couldn't be hidden. A pause. No imbras. No saden reconciliation. Only recognition. As Amina turned toward the exit, she placed the torn shoe on the edge of the stage for a moment. Not as a loss, but as a marker. Then she picked it up again and walked forward, past the broken system, past the silence it left behind, into a space where what had happened to her could no longer be reversed, but could finally be understood, and used to make sure it never repeated the same way again.